Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unravel how a single, highly specific archaeological discovery in the remote Oregon desert literally turned the entire scientific world upside down. We're looking at an incredible story of ancient engineering, incredibly stubborn academics, and a landscape that has completely vanished from the Earth. All right, let's just start with this staggering number, 95. We are talking about 95 perfectly preserved, intricately woven sandals pulled directly out of the dirt. And I don't mean fragments or dust. I mean dozens of fully recognizable shoes that look like they could have been taken off someone's foot just yesterday, despite being unimaginably ancient. So it brings up this wild puzzle, right? How exactly did a pile of ancient footwear dismantle decades of rigid scientific consensus? How on earth did these delicate, woven plant fibers manage to survive the brutal elements of the Pacific Northwest and ultimately rewrite the entire timeline of human history in the Americas? Part 1. The Unlikely Discovery. 1938, a cave, cattle dung, and an amateur archaeologist. Let's set the scene with our completely unlikely hero, Luther Cressman. He was a 40-year-old sociology professor. He didn't even have formal natural science training. But he drove a truck loaded with tools and graduate students into the high desert of south-central Oregon, basically just asking one question: how long had people actually lived in this landscape? While his team was digging through literal decades of accumulated cattle dung in Fort Rock Cave, when they suddenly hit a compact, continuous layer of pale volcanic pumice, and beneath that ash, dozens of flawlessly preserved sagebrush bark sandals. They were charred, sure, but structurally completely intact thanks to the cave's intensely dry climate. Section 2. Beneath the volcanic ash. The 7,600-year-old ticking clock. You see, hitting that volcanic ash wasn't just some geographical quirk. It was a literal prehistoric timestamp. That ash layer came from Mount Mazama. That's the catastrophic eruption that formed Crater Lake exactly 7,600 years ago. So Cressman immediately realized that anything buried below this continuous layer of ash absolutely had to be older than 7,600 years. The sandals were this incredible ticking clock, proving an unimaginably ancient human presence long before modern discoveries would push the timeline back even further to Paisley Cave. But here's the kicker. When Cressman published these findings, his colleagues essentially laughed him out of the room. Back then, the strict consensus was that human occupation of the Americas was geologically recent, like a few thousand years at most. The idea that fragile organic plant fibers could survive in Oregon longer than the oldest known ancient cities in the world, they actually called it implausible on its face. Cressman knew they were ancient, but the technology to definitively prove it to his critics just didn't exist yet. Section 3. Secrets of the Weave. Master Craftsmen of the Ancient Americas. To really understand why these are so mind-blowing, you have to look at the engineering behind them, which modern archaeologist Thomas Connolly has analyzed brilliantly. To build a Fort Rock sandal, a weaver starts with 5 thick structural fibers, called warps, and arranges them in a U-shape at the heel. Then, they use a technique known as close twining. This involves packing fibers incredibly tightly, back and forth, to create a dense, super firm sole that could actually protect a human foot from freezing volcanic rock. Finally, up at the toes, the cords subdivide into an open twine pattern. This creates a flexible, ventilated toe flap, complete with tie ropes. And honestly, managing consistent tension across 5 warp cords simultaneously, that requires intense focus, highly practiced hands, and knowledge that has been passed down for generations. These were definitely not mere experiments. These were the highly refined, finished products of a cultural craft tradition that already had a rich pre-existing history. Section 4. A forgotten wetland world. The landscape of 10,500 years ago. The environmental juxtaposition here is just absolutely staggering. If you visit Fort Rock today, you are standing in a bone-dry, flat alkali desert, totally surrounded by volcanic rock. But 10,500 years ago, right when the oldest of these sandals were being woven, it was a massive 75-meter-deep pluvial lake spanning over 2,300 square kilometers. The cave entrance literally looked out over open water. These people were living in a lush wetland. They were walking among pine trees, migratory birds, and giant, now extinct Pleistocene camels and horses. They needed those heavy-duty, flat-soled sandals just to navigate the frozen marshlands. Which brings us to Section 5. Breaking the Clovis Consensus. The Paisley Caves Revelation. Let's be really clear about the massive wall Cressman was up against. For about 70 years, the Clover's first model was the undisputed, unquestionable law of the land in archaeology. It confidently asserted that the very first humans came through an ice-free corridor about 13,000 years ago, which was defined by a specific fluted stone point. If you found something older than that, the scientific community just automatically assumed you either misdated it or misinterpreted it. End of story. But the fatal blow to Clover's first actually came from a site just 50 miles south, the Paisley Caves. Back in 2002, archaeologist Dennis Jenkins recovered ancient dried fecal deposits, which we call coprolites. By 2008, international DNA analysis proved that these contained human mitochondrial DNA matching indigenous Northeast Asian ancestry. The date, 14,300 years ago. This directly and undeniably broke the Clovis barrier by over 1,000 years. And wonderfully, they also found a sagebrush bark braid in those caves, dated to 12,000 years ago, connecting the site directly to the incredible weavers at Fort Rock. I absolutely love this progression, because it's like a parade of new technological heroes arriving just in time for our detective story. Look at how it evolves. Cressman used stratigraphy and volcanic ash way back in 1938. Then, in 1951, Willard Libby invented carbon-14 dating, tested the sandals and proved them to be over 9,000 years old. Fast forward to ancient DNA in 2008, and today, AMS radiocarbon dating allows us to test just a tiny few milligrams of material. That gives us a highly specific age range of 10,500 to 9,200 years for the sandals, without destroying these priceless artifacts in the process. It's just amazing how advancing science steadily unlocked their secrets over the decades. Section 6. A 10,000-year tradition. The legacy of the loom. Now, the story of the cave itself takes a pretty tragic turn. When Cressman's student returned in 1966, they found that artifact hunters and looters had severely disturbed the site. Desperate to reach the protected deposits, that 1966 team disastrously resorted to using dynamite and a tractor. I know, it's painful to hear. They basically destroyed the very context they were trying to study. Thankfully, a modern team returned in 2015. Instead of looking for more artifacts, they meticulously analyzed the sediment itself using micromorphology. And this careful work confirmed a staggering 10,000-year continuous tradition of Great Basin fiberworking, extending straight into the historic period of the Klamath and Paiute peoples. This brings us to a concept that really captures the awe of this whole explainer. These beautifully engineered sandals, they are an origin point. They are just a brilliant, sudden flash of visibility in a massive, continuous, and mostly hidden human story. The makers of these shoes were carrying on a deeply rooted tradition that was already thousands of years old. So, as those 95 sandals sit carefully preserved in institutional cases in Eugene today, I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. Think about all those crates sitting in museum storage from decades of past excavations. What other world-changing artifacts are sitting quietly in the dark right now, just waiting for the technology of tomorrow to finally give them a voice? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history we think we know.